Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Welcome back, everyone, to another reading of this great book of Islam, the Risala of Imam al-Qushayri, rahimahullah. And we're going to pick up right where we left off. We're in the beginning of page 58. First of all, I apologize. The recording today is a little bit different. I'm currently traveling, and I have to use my phone. I have some kind of internet issues. I think it's going to work, inshallah. And it might be a shorter class, just because of, I'm a little bit uncomfortable. But we'll see how far we get. Inshallah, we're on page 58. That's where we left off. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. So Imam al-Qushayri, he says, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him and may we benefit from his knowledge in this world and in the next. Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Musa al-Wasiti. He originally came from Khurasan, from the region of Farghana. Now, just as a little bit of anecdote, Farghana as a region is interesting because there is an Arabic expression that you find in some of the sort of Arabic literature, early Arabic literature, is they will say from Ghana to Farghana. From the West Africa, Ghana, all the way from to Farghana, which is like the expanse of the entire Muslim world. And the reason that I mention it is that one of my teachers, he always uses that expression, and I never knew where that was until you'd come across it in a book like this or something like that. Anyway, he studied with Al-Junayd and Al-Nuri. He was a great scholar, and he resided in Maru, where he died in 320. Now, the next group of people that we're going to read, by the way, you'll find in the sort of topmost part of the biography that they were students of Imam al-Junayd. And that's why Imam al-Junayd is considered the main figure that started sort of the school of Tasawwuf in Sunni Islam. We refer to Imam al-Junayd as Sayyid al-Ta'ifa or Imam al-Ta'ifa. He is the leader, the Imam of this group. So you'll see all of these great, people. They were his direct students, and that's why. That's why he's referred to it as that. Okay, Al-Wasiti said, fear and hope are two reins that restrain the servant of God from behaving improperly. He said, the quest of compensation for the acts of obedience to God springs from the forgetfulness of God's beneficence. Al-Wasiti said, when God wants to disgrace his servant, he throws him into this perversity and rotting corpses. He meant the companionship of the youth. So what that means is that you basically are you'll hang out with immature people. It's not a criticism of young people, but rather, what he's trying to say is that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a sign of Allah ta'ala's disgrace is upon somebody is that you're just not keeping good company. That's how we should think of it. I heard Muhammad ibn al-Hussein, may God have mercy on him, say, I heard Muhammad ibn Abdul Aziz al-Marwazi say, I heard al-Wasiti say, they have presented bad manners as sincerity and greed of their souls as freedom of action and their lowly aspirations as firmness of character. Through this, they have lost the true path and found themselves in a narrow spot. There is no life in their spiritual visions. There is no piety in their speeches. Whenever they utter a word and reveal anger, when they have made public addresses, they show vanity. The impetuosity of their souls speaks at the perfidy of their inner selves, and their voracious appetite for food testifies to the darkness of their hearts. God assail them, how perverted they are. I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. I heard the master Abu Ali al-Daqqaq, may God have mercy on him, say, a man from Maro once heard a pharmacist saying, on Friday, Al-Wasiti was passing by my store on the way to the cathedral mosque. Well, that's definitely a bad translation, but the cathedral mosque means the Jama, the mosque that everybody would gather for the Friday prayer. So in traditional Islamic cities, there would be one central mosque. And if you go to like old ancient Islamic cities, if you go to the old part of those cities, you'll find that somehow kind of constructed in a central location, there'll be this grand mosque that people would go to. And what would happen is that the other mosques would close on Friday for Jummah, and then everyone would gather in the gathering mosque. And there are some fiqh rulings about Salat al-Jum'ah, there can only be one Salat al-Jum'ah in a town, and that sort of, so the construction of that central mosque comes from that. Suddenly, of course, today we have population increase, so those fiqh rulings change, but that's sort of what's happening there. Suddenly, a strap of his sandal broke. I told him, Sheikh, would you allow me to repair your sandal? And he said, go ahead, repair. After I repaired the strap, he asked me, do you know why the strap of my sandal has broken? I said, no, tell me. He said, because I did not wash my feet for the sake of Friday. I told him, my Lord, there is a bath. Here's a bath. Do you want to use it? And he said, yes. So I took him to the bath and he washed him. Yani the idea of the story is that he is, every limb of his body is in a constant form of devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in that moment, he didn't do that one, piece of devotion. So this thing happened that would cause him to be able to continue his devotion. So sometimes when people are dedicated to a certain spiritual practice so much in their life, it's almost like their whole dunya life facilitates that in like this kind of case. Think about people that naturally wake up for Salatul Fajr, despite what time they slept the night before. If you're constantly used to that, you might hear a noise and that wakes you up from your sleep, or you have a dream that causes you to wake up, or something like that. Abu Hassan al-Sa'iq, his name is Ali ibn Muhammad al-Sahl al-Dinwari. He resided in Egypt, where he died. He was a Sufi master. Abu Uthman al-Maghribi said, I have not seen any Sufi master who was not more enlightened than Abu Yaqub al-Nahrajuri, nor did I see a Sufi master who was so full of awe of God as Abu Hassan ibn al-Sa'iq. He died in the year 330. Someone asked Ibn al-Sa'iq about providing proof of an absent thing by using a thing that is in evidence. He said, how can one provide proof of him, meaning God, who has no semblance or equal, by using the attributes of those who have the semblance and equals? Now, this is an extremely profound statement, because we believe in our belief system, as the Quran states, "Laysa kamithlihi shay." Nothing is like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you cannot use that which is in creation to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because there is no category in creation that is a category that to which Allah ta'ala can be compared. So Allah Ta'ala is beyond these categories. He is beyond space, He's beyond time, He's beyond physical form, etc. So this is actually a statement of Aqidah. It might not seem that like that from the beginning, but it's actually quite profound, because in its most basic, purest form, this is how we understand our belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. Someone asked him about the characteristics of the Sufi novice, and he answered by quoting the words of God, when the earth became straight for them, for all its breadth, and their souls became straight for them. And he said, the spiritual states are like lightning. When they last, this is nothing but self-deception and the promoting of one's lower nature. Let me just go back to the previous statement about the earth becomes straight for them, etc. Those on the spiritual path, and those who are committed and dedicated to the spiritual path, like we just said, like the person that wakes up naturally for Fajr, etc., the world around you starts to facilitate that, those spiritual practices. And those on the spiritual path who, for whatever reason, have been subject to some sort of miracle, or they've experienced miracles. One of the miracles is that space and time can be bent sort of in unnatural ways for them. They can travel long distances in short amount of time. They can do a lot in a little bit of time, etc. The spiritual state, as we will come to learn later in the book, this is one of the vocabulary of tasawwuf, is the difference between a hal and a maqam. The hal, the spiritual state, comes and goes. It can come, like he says, very strongly, and it comes and goes. If it comes and stays, it's not a hal, it's a maqam, it's a station. So you have, like somebody is struggling with their prayer. Sometimes they pray on time, sometimes they don't pray on time. And then all of a sudden they start praying on time all the time. That's where they are. That's their new station. They are constantly there. If one is aware, the first kind, the state, the hal, if one is aware of that and longing for that, then it's like you have switched your intention from worshiping God to worshiping that spiritual state. I'm just trying to explain the statement. So when you do something from a devotional point, like let's say you decide I'm going to read some Quran today, or something like that, and you start to take pleasure in what you're doing, there is a point in time where you're taking pleasure in the act replaces the original intention of what the act was for, which is purely supposed to be purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's sort of what he's saying. Okay, Abu Ishaq Ibrahim ibn Dawood al-Raqi. He was a Sufi master of Syria who was a friend of al-Junayd and Ibn al-Jalla. He lived a long life and died in 326 of the Hijrah. Ibrahim al-Raqi said, divine knowledge is the assertion of God as he is and placing him beyond whatever one might imagine about him. Similar to what we said before, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ. He said, God's power is evident and the eyes of men are open, yet the light of spiritual sights has grown dimmer. He said, the weakest of people is he who cannot repel his passions, and the strongest of people is he who is capable of repelling them. He also said, a sign of love of God is when you choose and obey him, meaning God, to follow in the footsteps of his Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Mimshad al-Dinwari. He was a great Sufi master, and he died in 299. Mimshad said, the good manners of the novice consist of obeying the commands of Sufi masters, meaning the type of people that we're reading about, serving his brethren, abandoning everything except the essentials, and observing the good manners prescribed by divine law. He also said, I have never entered into the presence of any Sufi master without first divesting myself of everything that is mine in order to partake of the blessings that are imparted to me by seeing them and listening to their instructions. When anyone enters into the presence of the master with something of his own, he will be cut off from the blessing of the master's vision, admonition, and instruction. And this is a universal teaching. So when you meet a spiritual person, somebody, he's not talking about like when you go to meet like a sheikh of like Arabic grammar or something like that. When you go to meet somebody who is known for their tasawwuf, known for their saintliness, known for their spiritual practice, their devotional practice, etc. If you enter with all of these preconceived notions, you're going to miss, and you're going to miss what that person has to offer you. When you are in that kind of environment, the best you can do, as he says, is to suspend those things so that you can receive, because you do not know what kind of message that you will receive. Oftentimes it's indirect. Oftentimes they'll say something that you kind of need to think about it for a little bit. It will linger with you. But if you come in and you have your own way of thinking, then you're not going to be able to receive that spiritual instruction. So you have to think of it as my rizq, my sustenance, my spiritual sustenance is going to be distributed throughout my life by meeting these type of people. So I want to be ready for that. It's like when somebody comes to you with an opportunity. and you're just, you're not ready, or like you're taking a nap, and somebody knocked at the door and then opportunity left. I mean, just, think of it as a very simple example. That's what he's saying. So when you know that there's a spiritual teacher that's visiting, for example, and you're going to go and you're going to attend some kind of event, you need to suspend your preconceived notions, so that you can be in this pure environment. It's an environment of remembrance to receive. And unfortunately, many people don't do that, and they don't follow this type of advice, and they luck out, and they're not able to benefit. Oh, look how this person is dressed, or look how this person is talking. Oh, they don't understand what they're talking. Oh, this guy is just, not the real deal. The shaitan kind of gets in your mind and starts playing all these tricks on you, and then and what's happening is it's preventing you from benefiting. Okay, Khair al-Nassaj, which is a nickname. He studied with Abu Hamza al-Baghdadi, met Asir al-Saqati, and was a friend of Abu al-Hussein al-Nuri. He lived a very long life. They say that he lived 120 years. Ashibli and Ibrahim al-Khawas repented during his preaching, yani meaning they made tawbah. They were not following the good life, and then when they met him, they made tawbah in his gathering. And that's really what used to happen in these Sufi gatherings, in these gatherings of spiritual teachings, is that people would like make their tawbah and like, no, I want to follow this path. And it's just a very common, even till today. And he was a teacher of many others. They say that his name was Muhammad ibn Ismail, and he came from Samarra. He was named Khair al-Nassaj after the following episode. He set out on a pilgrimage to Mecca. When he reached the gate of Kufa, a man seized him and said, "You are my slave. Your name is Khair." Khair had a dark complexion. He did not object to the man, and the latter employed him as a weaver of silk. Whenever the man called Khair, he would respond, "At your service." After a while, the man told him, "I was mistaken. You are not my slave, and your name is not Khair." So he went away and left the man. And he said, "I will not change the name that was given to me by a Muslim." So, I mean, some of these stories are hard for the modern mind to understand, but I guess the most simple way of saying this is that I'm just going to go with the flow. Wherever Allah wants me to be, I'm going to be. I'm not going to have, even if it's to the point where somebody falsely claims that I'm their slave, because I'm not focused on the movement of the pieces on this earthly plane. I'm focused on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I know it's hard to sometimes to comprehend that, but that's why these biographies, by the way, are important, because you have to understand that these were real people and these were real stories, and this is really how they felt and they dealt with the world around them. He said, "Fear is the whip of God by which he straightens the souls that have grown accustomed to bad manners." So we're always between fear and hope. Those are the two type of modes that the believer is between. Some people, they need the hope more than the fear, because it's the only way to bring them back. The Salaf, the type of people that we're talking about during this time period, they were more into the fear, because the general environment of Islam around them was so strong that the hope part wasn't the problem. The problem is that they wanted to be, very straight in their obedience. Now it's obviously different. Now we're kind of more in the time period where we need to give people hope more than fear. But it's on a case by case basis. So sometimes people come and they're taking it too casually, and you need a little bit of fear, you need a little bit of fire underneath you to do this. I heard Abdurrahman al-Sulami, may God have mercy on him, say, Abdurrahman al-Sulami, by the way, he has a book called At-Tabaqat, and a book where he narrates all of the biographies of the Sufis. So he's a central character. He was also a man of hadith. So you'll find his name in the chain of transmission frequently, because he was one of the people that gathered all of these stories. So I heard Abdurrahman al-Sulami, may God have mercy on him, say, I heard Abu al-Hasan al-Qazwini say, I heard Abu al-Hasan al-Maliki say, I asked one of those who were present at Khair al-Nassaj's deathbed about what happened to him. And he answered, when it was time for the sunset prayer, he lost consciousness. A few moments later, he opened his eyes and pointed toward the door of the house, saying, "Wait, may God protect you. Both you and I are servants who take their orders from God. What you are ordered to do will not elude you, whereas I shall miss what I am ordered to do." So he called for water and performed an ablution for the prayer. He then stretched himself on the bed, closed his eyes, uttered the shahada, and passed away. So, I mean, obviously, he was speaking to the angel of death, wanting the angel of death to give him a moment so he can, as we would say in English, get his affairs in order. Someone saw him in a dream and asked, "What did God do to you?" And he answered, "Don't ask me about this. All I can say is that I have finally found rest from the filthy world from this filthy world of yours." Abu Hamza al-Khurasani. He was from Nisapur, from the quarter called Mulqabad. He was a friend of Al-Junayd, Abu Sa'id al-Kharraz, and Abu Turab al-Nakhshibi. He was a scrupulous and righteous man. Remember, we said scrupulousness, al-wara. We talked about that before, what that means. Abu Hamza said, when someone is frightened by the reminder about approaching death, he begins to love everything that is permanent and hate everything that is transitory. So the reminder of death is a strong spiritual practice. It comes from the Sunnah. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Ikthuru dhikra hadha min ladhat," increase your remembrance of the destroyer of pleasure. And the Sufis amongst the Salaf, the people that we're talking about, they used to have very vivid practices. I mean, some people will build their own graves and sit in their own graves and read Quran and and things like that. So when you do that, or I mean, not I meant not in that way, but when you have a practice of remembering death frequently, you start to see the difference between that which is permanent and that which is transitory. So if you meditate on death on a daily basis, what ends up happening is it's not like a morbid type of teaching, which some people might think from the outset, but it's actually very liberating, because then you realize, okay, well, all of these things that I'm worried about, it's all just going to vanish. It could vanish at any moment. But the fact that I'm going to die, that I'm not going to live forever, that I have an expiry date, puts things in focus. And then you start to realize, okay, well, then there's this permanent thing, which is I'm going to die and then be resurrected and so on and so forth. It's a very powerful practice. He said the divine Gnostic, the Arif, strives to maintain his life day by day, and he receives his livelihood day by day. A man asked him for a piece of advice, and he answered, prepare provisions for the journey that lies before you. Like Allah says in the Quran, وَتَزَوَّدُوا فَإِنَّ خَيْرِ الزَّادِ التَّقْوَى. Prepare and pack. The best thing that you can pack is your taqwa. Now, the idea of living day by day, that's also completely counter to the way the modern person lives, because we live in an environment and in a time in human history where we're trying to plan for our retirement and for later years, and with these type of societies, they didn't need that because the society took care of its people. So therefore, people were literally focused on just, from the time I wake up, if I get to the time when I sleep, alhamdulillah, things are good. And that requires a huge amount of tawakkul, a huge amount of reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I heard Muhammad ibn Hussein, God have mercy on him, say, I heard Abu Tayyib al-Akki say, I heard Abu al-Hasan al-Misri say, I heard Abu Hamza al-Khurasani say, I wore a woolen cloak in a consecrated state. He means ihram, the state of ihram. Thus, year after year, I traveled 1,000 farsakh. I think in the footnote he says it's about 3 miles. While the sun was rising and setting on me, as soon as I left my consecrated state, I hurried to re-enter into it again. So it's like taking the idea of ihram, entering into the state of ihram, as a spiritual practice. I mean, you can't wear, if you're a man, you can't wear a wool cloak if you're in a state of ihram. So it's as if almost that he took this as a spiritual practice, because when you are in a state of ihram, as you know, when you go to Hajj or Umrah, there are things that you can do and things that you can't do. So you are sort of on a heightened spiritual awareness. So it's like he took this as a practice to always be in that state. Abu Bakr Dulaf ibn Jahdar al-Shibli. So this is Imam al-Shibli, the famous Sufi Imam al-Shibli. He was born and raised in Baghdad, though his ancestors hailed from Urushana. He studied with Al-Junayd and his contemporaries and was himself a great master of his time in his spiritual state, acumen, and knowledge. He adhered to the Maliki school of law. So even though the Maliki madhab grew up, the students of Imam Malik came to Egypt, and then from there they went west. So West Africa, North Africa, West Africa was largely Maliki. But there was a strong Maliki school in Baghdad, which people historically forget. After Ashibli had repented, meaning he made his tawbah, during a teaching assembly of Khair al-Nassaj, he came to Demavend, a region, I think in the footnote it says where it is, a province in Iran, and said, I have been the ruler of your land, now discharge me from my duties, meaning the dunya. At the beginning, his self-exertion on the path of God had no limit. I heard the master Abu Ali al-Daqqaq, may Allah have mercy on him, say, I was told that he rubbed a lot of salt into his eyes to prepare himself for night vigils. Therefore, sleep would never overtake him. That's extreme. For us, that's what he means. Like, he was serious. Like, I don't want to fall asleep at night, even if I've never tried this, but whatever, he did something or he took something so that he would physically not fall asleep. The great respect for the divine law that he showed on his deathbed, as reported by Bakran al-Dinawari, is an example of his great piety. And you can read that in the footnote. We'll just keep going with the text. I heard Sheikh Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, say, I heard Abu Abbas al-Baghdadi say at the end of his days, Ashibli, may God have mercy on him, used to say, this is a line of poetry that he composed, there are so many dangerous places in this life that were I to perish in any of them, I would be a stern warning for the rest of my family. He kind of reminding himself of death. During the month of Ramadan, Ashibli used to exert himself more than any of his contemporaries. He said, my Lord has revered this month, and I am the first of my fellow human beings to glorify it. I heard the master Abu Ali al-Daqqaq recount the story. Abu Muhammad Abdullah ibn Muhammad al-Murtash. He came from Nisapur, from the quarter of Al-Hira, although some say he came from Mulqabad. He studied with Abu Hafs al-Haddad and Abu Uthman al-Hiri. He was a great man and he used to stay at the Shunuziyya Mosque. He died in Baghdad in the year 328. Al-Murtaj said, desire of God is restraining your soul from what it desires. And that's what taqwa is basically. Turning your full attention to the commands of God Most High and satisfaction with what God has predetermined for you. He was told that someone can walk on water. So someone told him, Maulana, there's a man that can walk on water. And he answered, for me, the person whom God has enabled to resist his passion is far greater than the one who can walk on water. Now that's very important because sometimes, for whatever reason, a lot of Muslims, they think that when we say tasawwuf or we say Sufis, literally we're talking about people that can fly in the air and walk on water. And what he's saying, well, who cares? That's no feat whatsoever. The real feat is that when your lower nafs desires something, you don't give in. That's the real miracle. Because the lower self is an-nafsul ammara bisu. Ammara, that word is based on the morphology of that word is fa'ala. Al-fa'al is an action. Fa'al is to constantly do the action. So al-ammara bisu means that it's the self that constantly calls you to bad action. It's not an amir bisu. It doesn't command you once. Ammara, it constantly commands you to do something bad. So, and we always give in. I'll have a second piece. I'll have a third piece. I'll look a second time. I'll look a third time. So on and so forth. Whereas the miracle, the saintly person, is the person that says, no, and remembers Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and lowers their gaze or says no and restrains themselves. Um, Another reason this is important is that there are other religious traditions in which spiritual feats are measured by these type of things, people that can do physically intense things. And from our perspective, because of our belief that there is body and soul and nafs, the self, when you loosen the attachment of the body to the soul by starving the body, physically by starving the body, like yogis and stuff that like haven't moved and haven't eaten for like years and decades, then you can do these feats, these physical feats. Because for us, our interpretation of that is it's not a function of spirituality, it's a function of loosening the ties between the body and the soul. So if somebody can see behind the wall, or somebody can, sit in a position forever, or you see like these like Tibetan monks or whatever, they do like these unbelievable, they're like climbing the mountain without any restraints, and it's very easy for them. Okay, I mean that's impressive on a physical level, but that for us is not a sign of spirituality, because anybody can achieve that by the loosening of those um, by loosening of the bond between the body and the soul. So that statement, I mean, I know it's like only one sentence, but it's actually quite significant because it teaches us a fundamental teaching about our understanding of spirituality. Okay, Abu Ali Ahmad ibn Muhammad al-Rudabari. He was born in Baghdad and lived in Egypt, where he died in 322. He studied with al-Junayd, al-Nuri, ibn al-Jalla, and the Sufis of that generation. He was one of the cleverest Sufi masters who had profound knowledge of the Sufi path. I heard Sheikh Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami, may God have mercy on him, say, I heard Abu al-Qasim al-Dimishqi say, someone asked Abu Ali al-Rudabari about a man who liked listening to music and who used to say, now, I would, if I would add haram music if I was translating it. I mean, that's not in the text, but obviously there is a space for music, and actually will come in this book much later, towards the end of the book. But anyway, let's just go with what he said. A man who used to listen to music and used to say, "This is permitted for me because I have attained such a degree of perfection that any change in my internal state no longer has any influence on me." Al-Rudabari answered, "Yes, and he has attained, but he has attained the hellfire." So there are a couple of things that are happening here. Don't take from the statement that that means music is haram, because there's a space for melody and music and song and things like that. And actually, there's a place for that in the spiritual path. So, as sama' is the word that the Sufis use to discuss the gathering of remembrance, in which sometimes there are qasaid that are, songs or nat, they say in Urdu, that are sung. And in some spiritual approaches, there are musical instruments. Of course, the most famous example and the most common example is the dervishes, the whirling dervishes of Rumi, radiallahu anhu, of Jalal al-Din al-Rumi. And, they sing the Masnavi, his diwan. That's different than what he's talking about. He's talking about, just like dunya music, music that calls to bad actions and things like that. So, I mean, this is not the space and the time to talk about music. We're going to do that. I think it's actually maybe the last third of the book. We'll get to that, inshallah. But forget about the music example. He's saying, think about it like this: a man or a woman, for that matter, is in a haram environment, and then the person says, this no longer affects me. He's saying that's just ridiculous. It obviously affects you. The fact that you can't see that it affects you is going to take you to the hellfire. In other words, we have to be on our A game all the time. So the Quran and the Sunnah, following the Sharia, is something that's constant. It's not like partial, and then you arrive at a level you don't need to do that anymore. And that's a common misconception that people have about tasawwuf, and something that the Sufis themselves were very, very uh, um, clear about addressing. That you have to hold to the path, meaning you have to hold to the practices of the Prophet ﷺ up until your last dying breath. Someone asked him about Sufism, and he said, this teaching is serious through and through. do not mix it up with any amusement. Kind of what we just said. This is serious stuff because this is about how you're going to act all the time. This is not just a Friday night class. This is something that I hope we take with great seriousness. And I pray for myself and for all of you that it is transformative. I heard Muhammad ibn Hussein, may God have mercy on him, say, I heard Mansur ibn Abdullah say, I heard Abu Ali al-Rudhabari say, one sign of delusion is that God treats you well, although you commit sins. So if I constantly commit sins, but I'm doing well, I'm doing well, and there's a lot of goodness around me, we call this an istidraj. That's what Allah calls it in the Quran. Meaning Allah's slowly deceiving you, not because Allah is unjust, hasha lillah, because of you. فَلَمَّا زَاغُوا, when they turn, أَزَاغَ اللَّهُ قُلُوبَهُمْ, then Allah turns their heart. So this is from their own sins. But that's dangerous because if you engage in the haram and you have, as he says, God treats you well, this is a delusion. You are going to be blinded from the sin and you are not going to feel the gravity of the sin. So one of the signs of delusion is that God treats you well, although you commit sins. You then begin to forsake repentance and remorse. So you forget that you have to make tawbah from the sin or even feeling bad. As you fancy that God will pardon your transgressions and consider this to be God's leniency towards you. And this is a very common pattern. You find people that don't pray or that don't fast, and but I do good. I give money to the mosque. It's okay. Things like that. They kind of self delude themselves. He said, my teacher of Sufism was Al-Junaid. My teacher of jurisprudence was Abu al-Abbas al-Surayj. I think we talked about him before, who was a massive figure in the early Shafi'i madhab. My teacher in polite literature. That's interesting that the translator wrote polite literature. It's just an adab. I guess there can be lewd literature, but anyway, that's kind of interesting. Was Thalab, who was a famous grammarian, and my teacher of prophetic report, the hadith, was Ibrahim al-Harbi. All of these are great scholars of their different fields at his time. Okay, I'm going to read the next two to finish this page, and then I'll pause for questions and answers, inshallah. Abu Muhammad Abdullah ibn Munazil. He was a master of the Malamatiyya. I hope you will remember that several weeks ago we talked about the Lamatiyya or Malamatiyya approach to the spiritual path, which is a path that people will outwardly do things to make other people think that they are not good Muslims. I guess is the best way to put it. So when you see them, you're the first thought you would have is not that these are practicing Muslims or even good people. And they would do that to camouflage their spiritual devotion and their devotion to the Quran and Sunnah, so that their nafs is not there's no portion of the nafs. Now, at the time, I said in the beginning of the book, the reason we have this section in this introductory period of the book, in which we have all of these biographies, is Imam al-Qushayri rahimahullah is teaching us that these are the luminary figures of this science, of this discipline of tasawwuf. So it's kind of almost like I might be contradicting myself. Well, if this person is, and there was another biography that came a couple of weeks ago of this, one may ask themselves, well, what's the point of having it? At the time, it was a legitimate spiritual approach. Not that they would engage, I'm not saying they would engage in something haram publicly, but they wouldn't dress the part, let's just say. And they would want to be hidden. Now, and then there are spiritual practices or spiritual groups that still follow this tariqah, follow this way. It can lead to something questionable. So it's not something necessarily that we would engage in today, but I just wanted to explain the historical context of that. He was the master of the Malamatiyya, who was unique in his age. He studied with Hamdun al-Qassar. He was a great scholar who wrote down many prophetic reports, meaning the hadith. He died in Nisapur in the year 329 or 330. I heard Muhammad ibn Hussein, may God have mercy on him, say. I heard Abdullah ibn Muallim say. I heard Abdullah ibn Munazil say, he who neglects a religious duty will inevitably be tested by God Most High, who will cause him to neglect, he who causes to neglect the prophetic's custom. And soon as one has been tested by neglecting the prophetic prophet's custom, والسلام, he will also be tested by a reprehensible innovation. So you leave that which Allah has dictated for you, that which is obligatory. Eventually that's going to cause you to leave a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, which will eventually cause you to engage in an act of bid'ah, of reprehensible innovation. And this is an axiom. I mean, this happens all the time. The people of bid'ah, the people that do takfir of other Muslims, the people that criticize valid spiritual Islamic practices, like the things that we discuss when we talk about tasawwuf, that's bid'ah. That itself is a bid'ah. You will, if you investigate them, you will find that they have left an obligation which has caused them to diminish the value of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, which led them to engage in this bid'ah. It's like textbook, happens all the time, unfortunately. I heard Sheikh Abdul Rahman al-Sulami say, I heard Abu Ahmad ibn Isa say, I heard Abdullah al-Munazil say, your best moments are when you are safe from the promoting of your lower self or lower soul, and when your neighbors are safe from you thinking ill of them. Abu Ali Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab al-Thaqafi, so the last one we'll do for tonight. He was a great religious leader of his age. He studied with Abu Hafs al-Haddad and Hamdun al-Qassar. It was during his lifetime that Sufism appeared in Nisapur, and he died in 328. I heard Muhammad ibn Hussein say, I heard Mansur ibn Abdullah say, I heard Abu Ali al-Thaqafi say, if someone could absorb all the sciences and keep the company of many different people, he would still be unable to attain the rank of real men, unless he engages in ascetic exercises under the supervision of a Sufi master. You can study and read all the books of Islam that you want, but if you do not peg all of that knowledge in actual spiritual devotional practice, you're not going to gain anything. That's what he's saying. And this is really true. I mean, when I studied, I'm not that, smart or that well accomplished. I mean, there are people that I studied with that are, were much more advanced than me, are much more advanced than me. But the people that I was with or that were above me, that did not have a spiritual practice, did not fare well with that knowledge. So if you can talk the talk, but you have to walk the walk. And in Al-Azhar, tasawwuf is an essential part of the approach of studying Islam. Everybody I studied with, I mean, I would say almost without fail, had some type of spiritual practice, tariqah, sheikh, something like that, because that's an essential part of putting all of what we're studying into actual motion and having the respect of what we're studying and honoring that this is, we call it in English, the sacred sciences. This is not like, studying some kind of quote unquote secular discipline, even though I don't like the term, sacred versus secular. I mean, all knowledge is sacred from that point of view. But anyway, it's serious stuff. And if it's serious and you have to honor it, then you have to actually do those spiritual practices to inculcate in yourself and to anchor the knowledge in that spiritual base. And you can only do that by traveling this path with somebody who can guide you in this path. It's not like self-help kind of approach. Okay, and then he continues, a religious leader, so under the supervision of a Sufi master, a religious leader, or a sincere preacher. Somebody has to be there to coach you through it. If someone has not learned his manners from a teacher who has shown him the faults of his works and the flippancy of his soul, you must not follow his example in rectifying your own works. Abu Ali, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, said, there will come a time when life will not be happy for any man in this community unless he seeks the support of a hypocrite. Yeah, there'll be no khair, there'll be no goodness left. He also said, say fi or fi to the good things in this life when it treats you well, and also say like, oh, like, you kind of reject to the losses that you suffer in it when it turns its back on you. An intelligent man will never put his trust in something that treats you well one moment and treats you back bad the next, and turns its back on you the next. So he's like, you can't rely on the dunya, he's saying. So don't be happy when something good happens, and don't be sad when something bad happens, but rather put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. والله تعالى أعلى وأعلم وصلى اللهم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Okay. If there are any questions, concerns, comments, announcements, let me know. In the chat. My small announcement for today is that unfortunately next Friday I'll be traveling at this time, so I will not be able to have class. I'll make sure that that announcement goes out. But it's one of those times where I won't be able to do it. وفيك بارك الله فيك سيدي. I suspect that a lot of people are at the other event, which is fine. I'm glad that people are benefiting from Sheikh Noor and his suhbah. So I'm happy for that. So if there are no questions, then we'll put a pin in it here. Hope everyone has a blessed weekend, a good weekend. And just a reminder that, this is one of the greatest books of our tradition. And I know that it might seem long-winded, but things that are worthy of study are long-winded. One of my favorite novelists, Shelby Foote, he used to say, art is long. So you have to have patience. And if you have patience and we come together to the text every Friday, slow and steady, you will start to see it unravel itself before you, and you will see the benefit of it. I mean, these little anecdotes, stories, they're not just biographies, they're also teachings. So I just want to remind people the importance of the book, and to be patient. Once we leave the biography, I'm thinking maybe 2 or 3 more weeks we'll finish the whole biography section. We're actually going to start the book itself, which is to talk about the nomenclature and the concepts of tasawwuf. And I think it will become more clear, the benefit of the book. So just be patient, and inshallah we will benefit, all of us together. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli afdala salatin ala as'adi makhluqatika Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala آله وصحبه وسلم عدد معلوماتك ومداد كلماتك كلما ذكرك الذاكرون وغفل عن ذكره الغافلون. So I won't see you next Friday, inshallah.